In today's video, I want to show you how to take your drums from this to this. We're going to do this by layering samples in Drum Rack. One of the best ways to layer samples inside of Drum Rack is by using instrument racks. If we go into our kick drum and we right click on the top where it says the name of our sample, we can go to Group. This is going to create an instrument rack around that kick drum sample. And in order to add extra layers on top of this kick drum, we need to go to the chains view, this little icon here. This chain view just shows us our layers inside our kick drum group. Now, the reason why you'd want to layer your drums, you might find that you've got a kick drum that's very boomy, there's a lot of low end, it sounds very deep, but it's missing a lot of high frequencies to help it cut through the mix. We could use an EQ to boost the high frequencies of our kick drum, but equalization is limited by the frequencies contained in the original sample. This kick drum that I've got here is an 808 kick. So naturally it's very low and boomy. It has a little click at the beginning, but it's not very present. So I'm going to load in this kick drum here. We can hear it's got a nice hi-hat on the top, and that's going to add a nice bright layer to our kick drum. In order to layer this on top of our kick drum, we just need to drag the sample underneath in that empty space, and it's going to layer in that second kick drum over the top. You don't need to add any extra MIDI notes. Let's just press play. When it comes to layering kick drums, it's very important to check three main things. The first thing you want to check is where the sample starts playing from. If I take a look at my 808 kick, click and drag on the waveform, we can zoom in and see that our start flag there is at the first point of our kick drum where the waveform starts to move down. But if we go on to our second kick, you'll see if we zoom in, there is quite a noticeable gap at the beginning where the kick drum hasn't started fully playing yet. And this is going to cause issues between the two kick drums. It's going to make them sound bad. So we need to fix this. Pretty simple. We just need to drag this start point across until the waveform just starts to move down like that. You can already hear that it's tightening up the front end of our kick. Before we had a kind of flam effect, but now they sound nice and in sync. The second thing we need to check when we're layering samples is the pitch of the sample. This is especially important with low frequency instruments like kicks and snares that have a very noticeable fundamental frequency. And now in order to do this, we need to use a frequency analyzer to work out where the fundamental frequency is of each of our kick drums and then match them up. So in order to find this fundamental frequency, I'm going to use FabFilters Pro Q3. There are other options out there. You could use Ableton Spectrum, you could use Voxengo Span. I've just found that Pro Q3 is the easiest for me to use. So I'm going to solo my 808 kick. And you'll see that very noticeable peak there. I'm just going to place an EQ band on there, which is 50 Hertz, about G#1. And then I'm going to solo my other kick drum and do the same. It's a little bit harder to see on this kick. You can kind of see that there's a bump here, but most likely the fundamental frequency is probably this lower bump in the bottom. So I'm going to use this as my reference point, but we could always use that other second fundamental in order to tune it. So we need to go from 33 Hertz up to 50 Hertz. So now go into the controls and bring the pitch of that second kick drum up. Until that low fundamental bump is around about the same point as our other kick drum. Now you can do this by ear, but it's a little bit harder if you don't really know what you're listening for. So let's play both of them together now. And this is what it sounded like before and after. We could also use the detune below to tune it up and down as well, but to me that +6 sounds about right. The final thing to check is whether the actual kick drums are in phase or are working together. What we're going to do now is invert the phase of one of these kick drums, and we're going to see if they work better together when the phase is flipped. And in order to do that, we need to go into our audio effects, utilities, and I'm going to load the utility plugin onto one of my kicks just by dragging and dropping it onto one of the layers. It doesn't necessarily matter which layer you drop this onto. In the utility plugin, we're going to invert the phase on both the left and the right channels. So now all we have to do is play the kick drum in this inverted state, and we'll turn the whole plugin on and off. So just a point here on this diagram, the waveforms of our two kick drums aren't as simple as these two sine waves here. So they will never be fully cancelled out when inverting the phase of one or the other. This is just a demonstration to show you how phase inversion and cancellation can create weak sounding kick drums. And you should hear that in one, either the on or off mode, the kick drum will sound punchier, it'll sound louder. And that's because the two kick drums are in phase. You can also check this visually by looking at the meter on our grouped instrument rack here. If we look at the meter with the plugin on and off, you'll see this is with it on. So you see with it off, we get a louder volume, and that's because the two kick drums are aligned. So for this example, we don't actually need to flip the phase, but it's always good to check. And we can do the same layering trick with other instruments too. And some of the higher frequency instruments, you don't necessarily need to do all of those steps because there won't be as much cancellation between them. If we go onto our clap inside our drum rack, we can right click on the top, group this to itself, open up that chains view, and then let's find another clap to layer over it. So I'm using this clap to enhance the transient, the punch of our original clap, to add a little snap at the beginning. We can go an extra step further with this technique, and we can take our first clap, pan this all the way to the left. Let's load another clap in underneath, and this clap I'm going to pan to the right. And what this is going to do is make our clap sound nice and wide. It is very important that you pick 3 different claps for this technique. If you just pick the same clap and duplicate it again and again, it's not going to have that wide feel. They can be very similar, but it's better to pick 3 completely different ones. This layering technique isn't limited to drums either. If I go into my bass, I've actually got another instrument rack with 2 separate basses. One low and one high, and the high channel, it's not very noticeable, but it's got a little bit of stereo spread, keeping our low end of our bass nice and mono, but creating this wide bass sound when the 2 are added together. Now let's listen to the difference between our track before our layering and after. So this is before. It's a great way to add extra punch and emphasis to your drums without having to jump to the EQ or the compression in the songwriting stage. This video features topics from our 16-hour online DAW courses in Ableton Live and Logic Pro. So go to our website, modulateonline.com, to view all our courses. And if you need any advice on what to learn, just click on the contact button in the top right-hand corner and get in touch with us today.